your host, Maureen Metcalf.
And today I am delighted that our guest is Jorrit Papandreou.
Delighted to be with you, Maureen. One more time.
One more time. Yeah, this is the encore, which I hope there are many more of.
Very honored and humbled.
Tell us a little bit about this journey. You were born in the U.S.
That's right. I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota. Father and mother were married there, and I was born there, but then they soon took off for Berkeley, California, where my father took on the Department of Economics, and so I grew up the first years of my life in California, in Berkeley. But a turbulent youth also, because my father then decided, after many trips to Greece, to go back. So we were going back and forth, and at that time, of course, to travel to Greece was a very different thing. We took the car to New York, and then from there on a boat 2 weeks to Greece. So it was a major endeavor to travel there. Now it's a few hours. And of course, it was quite a big change for me from one country to another. And then, of course, Greece was going through a period of trying to bring democracy. And we ended up, unluckily, with a dictatorship with my father and grandfather in jail and finally in exile. Before I came back and studied in college in the U.S., we were a refugee as a family in Sweden and then in Canada. So we lot around the world.
You have been militantly committed to democracy.
Yes.
Why the personal commitment?
Well, living under a dictatorship, you can feel that our societies have potential. And of course, when they're ruled by authoritarian leaders, militaries, dictatorships, it's not only the brutality of oppression, a lack of freedom of speech, torture, lack of rule of law. You could be hauled into a jail for nothing. I remember growing up during those years in the dictatorship, before we were exiled, the insanity, not only the brutality, but also the insanity of dictators. So if we had sideburns, they would tell us to shave them off because they were like the Beatles. Or if we were wearing bell-bottoms, they would tear our bell-bottoms, and if a woman was wearing a miniskirt, they would take down the hem. These were things that the dictatorship would do. I mean, those were the somewhat more benign things, because you could be pulled in and tortured, and the torture was terrible. I'll just give you one case, because these cases were taken to the European Court of Human Rights, and Greece was actually expelled from the so-called Council of Europe then during the dictatorship. I remember as a kid, one of the stories, the woman that was pregnant, they tied her feet on a rope and pulled her up on a helicopter and would dip her into the sea with this helicopter as she was pregnant. She lost her baby, of course. These are just things that they would do to intimidate and, of course, to extract certain information. Living through a dictatorship, you have this really deep sense of injustice, and also that there's such a crime, that there's so much potential in your society which is being lost. Don't forget that Europe, around 50% of the population lived in some form of dictatorship, 50% of the population that's alive today. So Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, there were many dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. So Europe today is very much a beacon of democracy. We're still striving to make sure that it's working. Sometimes we equate democracy simply with voting and electing a representative. Well, that is not really the concept of democracy from the ancient times. And the real meaning of democracy was you could control your fate. You had the right. You had the possibility, which was an amazing revelation at the time, in ancient times, because people would basically fatalistic. If the king would say something, his word would stand. If it was a tyrant or you were in a hierarchy in a society or a high priest, that was the order that you did not question. All of a sudden, these people in the small community called Athens and so many other small cities said, well, actually, we can take our fate into our own hands. We can actually change things. We can actually imagine a different world. We don't have to accept this. And so that's how politics was invented, basically. I mean, there's a revelation, yeah. Okay, now politics comes from the word citizen, being a good citizen. Democracy was there to make sure that we don't have tyrants, and we make sure that people do have the voice. So my question would be today, in our modern democracy, do people feel that they have a voice? And not just on Facebook, but I mean a real voice and influential. Are we asking our citizens? Are they participating? Are there all kinds of institutions which are not just voting once every 4 years, but are there all kinds of institutions where their interests are being expressed, where they can actually shape their community, they can shape the future? And I think what people are feeling today is that even though there's immense power, there's a lot of money around, there's great technology, people are starting to feel somewhat powerless about what's happening in the world. Things are globalizing. This turbulent world, which we're talking about here, makes people feel fear, insecurity, and sense of powerlessness. So I think we need to rethink how democracy today is not simply electing our representatives, but it's a whole culture of participation. And that's what I feel is the way we will be able to solve the problems. And we, as politicians, cannot solve the problems alone. We have this idea that you elect a leader, he or she is going to deliver. Yes, that we have to do that also. But the types of problems we have today are so complex, and they need so much innovation and also understanding of people who are going to be affected by one solution or another, that they actually participate and find themselves in these solutions. They actually come with ideas, because sometimes, very often, I may have a good idea, but there are so many other people that have better ideas than I do, and I want their views, and of course their interests also, which have to be represented. So we need to have a much more complex idea of what democracy is, but its basic idea is that make sure that people feel that they can identify with a system that respects them, that empowers them, that gives them a voice, and that they can actually not only share their future, but also shape their future.
Which seems so important as so many people are feeling disenfranchised.
Yes.
That we return to the original views of democracy.
Yes, and I think that we are seeing the phenomenon like the so-called Trump phenomenon. I'm not talking about him personally, but this is a phenomenon. It's not only in the United States, it's in other parts of the world also, as people who feel disenfranchised, and then when they go to the polls, they say, I'm just going to vote against the system because it's not working for me.
Yeah.
Now, is divisive rhetoric and hate and racism and ultranationalism, is that going to solve our problems? No. It's a dead end. In a world where problems are global, we need cooperation. In a world where our societies are more diverse, we need that spirit of shared societies. And when we do that, we're much more effective and we're much more secure. And that's what happens when you only have a choice every 4 years. You just say, okay, the hell with it, I'm going to do this. But if you do have daily participation, or if not daily, but often, and you're given that capacity, you take on a much more responsibility, but you also feel responsible for the outcome, and you can also shape your society much better.
What would you like the next era of leaders to be thinking about at this point in time in history around the world?
I think what's the most important now, because we have, as I said earlier, huge capacity. There's a lot of power that we can wield in the world. Not that leaders who are elected are necessarily that powerful, because the power comes from different, it could be from corporations, it could be from communications, it could be in finance, it could be military, it could be in many different ways. But how we use this huge capacity we've created, this huge power we've created, is a moral issue. It's not a technical issue. It's not an application which we're going to find which is going to solve all our problems. Those are good, and we all enjoy our apps and so on. They be over-consuming our time and our daily life. If we don't realize that this new power, this continually growing power we are creating, has to be used in a way that it will serve the public good. It will serve a moral purpose, and it will serve to empower, to protect, to make people feel secure, to make people respected and feel that they are that there's a worthiness in their lives and they have a purpose. If we don't do that, then this power will be misused, it will be abused. And I fear that the abuse of power, and we've seen it in different ways. It could be the financial system selling stock, which was AAA supposedly, and it was trash, and people were duped into buying. It is, or money in politics, being able to buy up representatives or lobby and completely, or certain technologies which we don't know where they will go. I mean, we are now talking about robotics that will replace much in labor. What will we do with society? What will we do with an aging society where we have more people, hopefully more healthy people, but older? How are they going to be part of society? So we are creating a society with new potential, But if we don't use it in a just and in a one which serves everyone, public good, we will see cleavages, we will see pain, we will see hatred, we will see anger, and some politicians will want to exploit that. So I think leaders have to be able to say, let's sit down and see how we use all this potential and how we deal with all these. And that's where I think leaders need to, first of all, think of their own moral purpose, their own, what they want to represent in life, and what their responsibilities are.
And that's true of business leaders, political leaders,
yes,
nonprofit leaders.
that's right. I think this is general. When you have been given a responsibility, which also is power, small or more, it is and also it's to think about what your purpose is, what you are. I would say not get enamored by this power, but make sure that you are in control yourself and not let it lead you, but you lead it towards a moral purpose.
What is a humanly constructed divide?
Yeah, well, I gave an example of what I experienced, and it was a time when on the island of Cyprus, which is a divided island, the northern part has been occupied by the Turkish army, and the southern part, so it's Greek Cypriot, the northern Turkish Cypriots living there. It used to be a united island where people would live together, but I won't get into the history. I was trying to, with my Turkish counterpart, so we have Greece, Turkey, and then Cyprus, which is divided, trying to see how we could get together, a rapprochement. As I said earlier, trying to let people show their potential, and so there was a people's diplomacy. People started meeting each other and doing things together, women to women, business to business, football teams, music, and so on, art. Then what happened on the island is the teachers' union on both sides, the Greek Cypriots on the one and the Turkish Cypriots on the other, started talking with each other. And all of a sudden something occurred. The teachers' union called me up from Cyprus, and they said, we have this young boy who has leukemia, and we can't find anybody to match his bone marrow for a transplant. And he said, we talked to the Turkish Cypriots, and we're thinking, can we search in the Turkish Cypriot side? Maybe there's a Turkish Cypriot boy that has a match. But that would need permission from the Turkish side. So I called up my counterpart in Turkey, and he said, this is a good idea, let's do it. So they did search amongst the schools, and they found a boy, a Turkish Cypriot, that shared similar DNA and was compatible. And there was a transplant, a marrow transplant from a Turkish Cypriot boy to a Greek Cypriot boy. Now what does that tell me? First of all, that society itself, when you give them the hope, they will take these initiatives. And there's a lot of potential. But it also gives me the fact that we are so common, human beings. We share DNAs, there's very little difference really. But we construct differences. Sometimes construct our conflicts. We construct our societies. That's in our minds. It's in our minds, it's in our economies, it's in our societies. And we need a sense of community. But we don't need a sense of community which is against somebody else. We can create communities which are with each other. If we have constructed conflicts, we can reconstruct societies to share values and to share our societies and be able to live together. We don't have to accept that it's inevitable that we will have these differences and these conflicts. Let's say, take the European Union. Well, we had all these conflicts. Germans and the French, the Holocaust, Greece was under Nazi occupation, there were 1 million Greeks up in the mountains, guerrilla fighters, terrible wars, war after war. And people might say, well, it's inevitable, these people are just going to be fighting. But what we did is we said, no, we can construct something different. And if it's the will that's there, we'll construct it based on certain values. No conflict, peaceful resolution of differences, respect human rights, respect minority rights, respect borders. Let's share wealth. Let's help for prosperity, democracy. And on these values, we have been able to say it's not inevitable that we go to war. We have constructed a society where we can be in peace. So it is the will, the political will of our peoples and our leaders that can reconstruct societies in a positive way. It's not always easy, and in conflict it's not always easy, but if you have that will, there will be a way, and I think this is what we need. The more we have a rhetoric of war, the more we have a rhetoric of bashing the other side, the more we try to stereotype, we will be constructing a present or a future conflict or a continual conflict. So I think this is where the hope is, that we have shown that, and there are small examples like in Cyprus, which I mentioned, or there are big examples like the European Union, that we can construct a better future ourselves.
Again, for listeners who don't understand as much about the European Union,
Yeah.
26 member nations coming together in the 70s. As you said, under nations are admitted, I believe, based on their values.
Yes, well, it began after the Second World War, when we were in a devastated continent. And, of course, Germany, France, the UK, all of the countries were devastated, and so many lives lost, and so much destruction. So we said, that then founding fathers of this European Union, they said, well, let us see if we can work together and become interdependent. Let's put it that way. That was the idea. So that we are so interdependent that we don't want to fight with each other. We don't want a conflict. So it began with a steel and coal cooperation. Steel and coal, don't forget, those were the basic industries for the military.
Okay.
So if you have them together, it won't be one military against the other, because this will be a cooperation.
Okay.
But it's also to rebuild. And then it developed into the agricultural cooperation, and then, of course, a common market, and then a common union based on these values. But that was the basic thing. It wasn't on an ethnicity. It wasn't like I'm German or Greek or French or British or whatever. It is, we share these common values. We can be different. So it began with just a few. Greece came in when we were 12. Then there were 15. Finally, we're 27 actually now.
27, wow.
28,
Okay.
but the UK has decided to opt out, unluckily. But don't need to get into that. But what that means is that we have been able to construct a different type of society built on peace. And that's I think, is the very big importance, the huge importance of the European Union, because it gives you a sense of security. You have your identity. We each have our special identities, but they're not against each other. They're with each other. We have our special, as Greeks, good and bad, and Germans good and bad, but we've been able to come together on these basis of these values.
I think it's so important as a model for interdependence.
Yes.
And one can argue efficiency and all that stuff, and that's not the point here, but that the system continues to emerge and flex and flow. And other than Brexit, which I realize is significant, all of the member nations are cohering even during significant financial upheaval.
That's right. And in Greece, for example, we decided, the Greek people decided, that even though there were lots of sacrifices, and there were major sacrifices, maybe more than needed, but there were major sacrifices in cutting wages and pensions and these austerity measures to make sure that our budget was responsible, and that we could also convince the markets, but also our fellow member states and the European Union that we would be a responsible member. We wanted to stay in. We could have said, no, we don't want that. We'll go out and we'll do our own thing. No, we said we want to stay in. We'll follow the rules. So that sense of community is quite strong, and I think that's why Europe is important, because it is a major peace project. But if you think about the world as a whole, we are very interdependent, more and more so. And no one country is isolated. So let's look, how did the European Union work? Are there things we can learn at the global level or other regions where we can actually work together? So let's say the African Union now. There's an African Union, not like the European Union, but there's the ASEAN, which is an Asian sort of counterpart of the European Union. There's Latin American cooperation like Mercosur and so on. They are different forms of cooperation at the regional level. And maybe at the global level we can see how we become more cooperative in based on certain values. So in this globalizing world, if we take the European example, how are we going to begin to share values across the planet, across borders, where we can say, okay, we have our differences, we have our different identities, we have our different traditions, but there's a core there that is which humanity agrees with on these values, and that keeps us working and cooperating together rather than in conflict.
Thank you. I think that's a brilliant note to end on, the idea that the EU is a model for what is possible for cooperation.
And we do have our problems, and it's not easy. It is a possible model, and I think we should see it as that. But thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, George. It's such an honor for me to get to have this conversation with you and to share it with our listeners.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jorrit Volkers. Thank you for taking time to be with us. Jorrit is the head of Deloitte University EMEA, and he's running the Deloitte University.
In Deloitte, leadership is very important. What I found out, there is so much out there, so much theory, so much good articles, books about leadership, of which a lot of it's usable, even in a big professional service firm like Deloitte. Leadership in turbulent times is something as a specific topic. We asked big leaders, please reflect a bit on what it is to be a leader in turbulent times. So we had Mr. Van Rompuy, who was the first president of the European Union, and he spoke about his leadership effectiveness in turbulent times, which he had a lot of them in Europe. We had David Petraeus, who talked, of course, about the crisis that he had in Afghanistan, Iraq, Mali, Haiti, and how he operated that. And, of course, today we will have Jeroen van der Veer, who is the chairman of Shell, or was the CEO of Shell. And he will also talk about his leadership in turbulent times. And for me, it would be very interesting, and we can only do that afterwards, to compare the three and their different styles and how they managed the crises in their companies or countries or even in Europe, and see what they needed to be successful in doing that. We now already can see, because we had two, Van Rompuy and Petraeus, which were quite different, because you could see Van Rompuy manages crises by dialogue, while, of course, Petraeus, as a military leader, leads much more through goal setting and achieving goals with the means that he has. So much more directive leadership. So what you already could see, and I'm very interested what Jeroen van der Veer, who is, of course, not from the military and not from the civil service, but from a company, how he did it in his crisis. So we will hear that later on. So for me, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help organizing this conference and be able to select even one of the main topic of the conference and help selecting that. So that was very nice.
So let's move to Deloitte University.
Well, Deloitte University is basically, it's a corporate university, so it's only for Deloitte people. Although in the United States we also have the university where it's already also opened up for clients, and here in EMEA we run one program also for clients. But that is also a bit in self-interest, because we do that for CFOs, and it's for the top Fortune 500 CFOs. And after the program, which is a successful program, we ask them whatever they want to join our industry programs and work with us on the trainings that we do. And that works very well, by the way.
You know, coming out of Accenture, we partnered with our clients.
Yeah, and that is what we do, especially in our industry trainings, the trainings that we do there in, I think now 27 different industries are co-created with clients. And also the trainings that we do there are simulations. But the main interest for us is, of course, and that's why we are here and that's why we are sponsoring this year's conference, is leadership. Because here in EMEA, we did interviews with all the CEOs of the 27 member firms. Now a bit less because we had some mergers last year. But we had interviews with 27 CEOs, but also a lot of business leaders. And they said what we lack is real leadership inside Deloitte. There is, of course, leadership, but it's not at all levels where we would like to have it at all levels. So what we did then is we started, and basically that started after the keynote speech that I had with Professor Gil Hickman. We started with, as we call it, a leadership project. And in that leadership project, we are designing a leadership journey for people as soon as they enter the firm until they retire. So it's not... And we base that not on one theory or one leadership framework, but we are working, and that's why it's so interesting for us here, we are working with all the theories that are applicable. In the workshops, we have done a lot of work to see what is specific on leadership with Deloitte. Out of the workshops came what we call a narrative, which is about yourself, what do you need as a person, what is about the other, and what is connecting the two. What we did is find words around it and then decided that we made definitions of what we call the boxes. After that, we looked, what do you need as a leadership skill at a certain level in Deloitte? So what do you need if you enter the firm on leadership skills? What do you need when you are a manager, a senior manager, a director, a partner, or a senior manager?
So basically the conveyor belt from lead self to lead a large enterprise.
And what we found out that some things are the same no matter whatever you are entering the firm or you are a senior partner.
Like ethics?
Like ethics, but also like listening, voicing, standing up, being frank and honest. Also, what is in our firm very important is and it was also here on the conference, is purpose, purposeful leadership, because that's something we think should be all over the place. Because if you really want to be a company as we want to be, that have a shared purpose, but also an individual purpose that really makes the difference, then you have to be aware of that at all levels. So that's also one of the examples that we work on at all levels.
So each participant in the university then identifies their own personal purpose?
Yes. And we hope that they will identify them also on the bigger purpose of Deloitte. And of course, that is very broadly formulated. It's to make an impact that matters. But you have to color that on an effective way.
It's certainly, well, in my books, that's the first chapter of exercises is what's my personal purpose?
Yeah.
What are my values? And then I ask a series of reflection questions. How does that cause me to behave? But then how do I fit within the organization?
Exactly.
And do the systems and processes that are in place enforce or mitigate who I think I am and what I stand for? So how do I align with the organization? And if I'm not aligned as I've just entered, I should maybe not be here.
Exactly. That's exactly how we look at it. If you don't want to align or can't align, then better find another job, because then you don't fit into the organization.
And you'll be less satisfied, less engaged.
Exactly. And that will also have an effect on other people that work for us. So what we are now doing is trying to put all the work that we've done in the workshops in designing trainings, and in that trainings, and that could be small snippets of trainings, that could be formal training, that could be classroom training, it could be digital learning, it could be everything. We are designing now modules that we can stick to technical programs, but also to industry programs, to business advisory programs, so that ultimately you can see if you work for us, you will be developed also as a leader at all levels.
People come in presumably with extremely high technical skills.
Yes, most of them, yeah.
And often people who have invested their time building technical skills have invested all of their time doing that and haven't invested an equal amount of time becoming a better leader. And if the organization doesn't tell them they should, they often don't.
Exactly, and then ultimately you will have a very unproductive organization.
I coach some of them. Well, and because the organizations are starting to recognize that brilliant physicians, as an example, and researchers, they're curing cancer, but now they're leading organizations that cure cancer. There's an additional set of skills that needs to be added.
Yeah, because we are not a firm with professional managers. Everybody who works for us and is in leadership positions is basically a practitioner at a different stage in his career. And now it was more a coincidence that you had a person who could lead, and then even a lot of times not very effective. So that's why we are now emphasizing that leadership on all levels is very important, and we start training people around it. And then, as I said before, we will not use one framework, one theory. We will use what is applicable to us.
And what is applicable, I assume, it is a broad range depending on the industry, geography.
And also what we want is not something that is fixed, so we are not going to fix it and stabilize it, but it has to be agile, so that new insights. I had this conference again, I was in some workshops, and I got some very good insights especially on virtual leadership, which was a great lecture that we had around it, which is for us of key importance because almost all our teams work virtually.
Actually, I want to find out who that is offline because that's something I want to share with listeners. My sister works for Microsoft and is leading virtual teams, and she said, "Yeah, share more. Share the latest research with me."
It's in fact, if you listen to the lecture, it's very simple, or it seems very simple. You have to find out what cultural background people have, what their personal situation is. You have to implement how to resolve conflicts. All those kind of very simple things you need to put in place. But the first and most important thing is getting to know each other. And if you don't spend time there, it will be an ineffective or a less effective team.
Which has been a theme throughout the entire conference for me. I've heard consistently, in times of complexity, personal relationships need to be built and maintained, even if we never see one another face to face again. If I have a call with you, I'll know who you are, and we will have shared some experience of getting to know one another.
Where we are now currently looking at, and we would like to see also some scientific proof of that, is that we think, but it's an assumption, that it makes sense if you have a team working virtually to at least get them together one time, face to face, without interference of computers and telephones. And we think that teams will be more effective if they have been together.
Again, those are the comments I've heard this week through the interview series, but I don't know that I could point to any specific research.
No, I didn't find it yet, but I hope to find it and then work with it. But because, as I said, it's for us, it's crucial. All our teams work global and virtual.
You know, one of the things I want to just comment on, because my whole work is built around innovating how we lead. So not just I went to a leadership class in, year 2000 and now I'm set, but that as the world changes, how I lead must change.
For instance, a leader now has to Twitter, otherwise he can't be a leader anymore.
Is that true?
At least, no, absolutely not. No, I'm referring to Mr. Trump. Yeah.
And we're not going to go there.
No, let's not go there.
But leaders need to communicate in a way that is
exactly that is effective. Yeah, let's keep it there.
Stop it at that. But the definition of leading has changed, even in the last probably since I saw you last. The conference seems different this year, in part maybe because of your organizing, but in part because the world context has changed with populism, with new presidents and prime ministers, with Brexit. A lot of changes.
It's very interesting to look at. I completely agree with you. The world changed every time and again, and that has its effect on leadership, but this is also on political leadership. What happens in the companies and perhaps also in the public sector is that the possibility of all the data, of all the means that we have at our disposal are changing the way how you lead very dramatically. In the lecture about the virtual leadership, they asked us, how many teams do you think work virtually? And how do you think it was 10 years ago? And that was astonishing, because 10 years ago it was only 22% and now it's 85%. So imagine what an effect that has on the way you lead.
Well, think about when you and I joined the workforce. We wrote things on typewriters, paper. There was an inbox that was a physical thing, right? There was a mail system that we got actual client correspondence through.
Yeah, that was just the postman brought the correspondence.
Then
we did when I started working. There were no computers. I had a telex.
I started shortly after that, but at that point, we were using mainframes. Right, I entered data into a mainframe, and the next morning I would go get reports that were printed on big sheets. And if there was a mistake, you'd run it overnight again. So the response time was days for an analysis, not 3 seconds. And so, of course,
happy days.
Well, I carried a heavy audit bag back then. And so because of the speed of information, the way we lead globally has to change.
Absolutely. And you see that now already changing, because when email happened, and it's the same, by the way, with WhatsApp and all those kind of things, SMS, you can name it, Twitter. What we see is that we are now coming out of an era where there was always an instantly reply. If you don't answer an email immediately, you're almost a criminal. And you see now that that starts to change. There are companies now who close down their email systems in the weekends, because we also found out that you need to have some reflection time. And that is also one of the things that was very important in this whole conference this year. You need time to reflect, to be quiet, to listen, and to reflect on what you are doing.
The synthesis, integration, not just thinking about the stuff, but thinking about who am I?
Exactly.
The context of the stuff.
Exactly. That means also that you shouldn't be always disturbed by your devices. So I don't know how you do it, but I sometimes, in the weekends, I try to put it off. I don't use it.
I have one day a week that I don't use it.
Okay.
But I have a reflection practice. I walk a lot. Oddly, I walk at night, so even the visual of nature isn't as distracting. But if I sit down, I often fall asleep. So I have to keep moving.
Well, one of the themes that I also attended in one of the workshops was about meditation. They said, yes, well, there's proof for everything, but they said, well, if you start the day or do meditation at least for 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, it will make you more effective. And that's
physiologically.
Yes.
Our DNA changes, our frontal lobe builds, the neural network expands. There's a lot of research that says our thinking gets better.
Exactly. And so that is, for me, that was a new insight, that it has been proven from the physiological side. And I did it already for a long time. Every morning when I wake up, I first spend 15, 20 minutes really reflecting on what I will do that day, what were the problems of the day before, and how do they look after a night's sleep, because that's basically different. They look different. So, and now I heard that it's actually proven that it's effective. And I think we also are going to take that up into our leadership trainings, that we are going to start learning people how to do it.
I teach my MBA students to do it. And it's interesting the questions they have, because some will say it's against my religion. So contextualizing it that it's not a religious practice.
Exactly.
It's weightlifting for the brain.
Exactly.
It doesn't do any good to go to the gym and have a fabulous body and a flabby brain. So there are ways to contextualize it, I think.
Yeah, and that's not only for the mind, but also for the body, of course. We are taking much more care of our bodies, which makes us also more effective. And I attended also a few workshops around that theme. So for me, it was a great thing, and a lot of workshops, a lot of topics in the conference I can use for my leadership journey within Deloitte University. So for me, it has been very beneficial as a person, but also as an organization.
So as we wrap up, hopefully some people from Deloitte University will be listening to you. Do you have, and also the many people from ILA and beyond who weren't maybe able to attend the conference, but would like to hear a closing message from you as the conference organizer?
Well, I would almost say join Deloitte and be part of our leadership journey, but that's not done.
Become a client of Deloitte, I think.
Oh, well, yeah, of course we like that also. No, my message would be, have your eyes and ears wide open to all the changes in community, what's happening in our society, but also to all the research that has been done, and try to apply what's applicable for you in your day-to-day life. And hopefully then you will become a better leader.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jorrit, for your leadership in creating an amazing conference and your leadership in Deloitte, because I know what an important firm you guys are. And it is only with good leadership in this time that you'll continue to add the value that's possible.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.